I do have to say, I think in the end, I'm also surprised, speaking earlier about restraint, that none of us mentioned how constantly, like, Philippa came by again, and oh, yeah, this time she's wearing nothing. This time she's wearing makeup marks on her neck and breasts. This time,
Yeah.
like in all the other sources, Philippa, just for 5 minutes, keep it in your pants, okay? Like, just we're trying here to rule the world, and you're just having sex with everyone.
Is this a private discussion? It is now. I love all that.
Hey guys, welcome to Breakfast in Beauclair, a Global Witcher podcast. My name is Alyssa from Good Morning, and I'll be your host as you, I, and our international Hansa accompany Geralt of Rivia and his destiny Cyrilla of Sintra across the continent. Hello, and welcome to the very first episode of 2026. Excited to finish up Tower of Swallows and look ahead to a few exciting things at the end of this season and new episodes of the podcast in the spring. Thank you to our patrons and our producer level patrons, Katie the Redhead of Toussaint, Jacob B, Charlotte from Egberg Glamorai, The Original Approach, Libby, John of Riblia, Tom from Australia, Jill Kate the Tappy Witch, Ollie from Sweden, James Carson III, Mary of Temeria, Softie, Lisa C, and Sidna. If you would like to learn more about supporting Breakfast in Beauclair, visit patreon.com/breakfastinbeauclair. As for this episode, Daniel from the Netherlands and Softie from the UK call in for Andrzej Sapkowski's Tower of Swallows, Chapter 8. Join us as we discuss Kovir's Arm to Neutrality, Whoresons of Upright Character, The Wisdom of the Good Book, Royal Marriages and Moral Compromises, Political Doublespeak, Espionage, Sheala de Tancarville Conspiracy Theories, The Unseen Consequences of Power, and a million bizants? Without further ado, let's get to our discussion of Andrzej Sapkowski's Tower of Swallows, Chapter 8. Hey guys, welcome to Breakfast in Beauclair. My name is Alyssa, and today we're welcoming two members of our Hansa to the show. You'll recognize my first guest from their appearances on the podcast in episodes 42 to 44, covering Blood of Elves, Chapter 6, and episode 104, Baptisms of Fire, Chapter 7. He started studying history in Leiden and is currently writing his bachelor's thesis about missionaries and politics in the high medieval Baltic. He enjoys analyzing the politics in warfare fantasy, and nowadays is distracted by Warhammer miniatures. My second guest is back as one of this season's co-hosts. Please welcome Dana from the Netherlands and Softie from the UK. Hello, guys. Welcome.
Hi, Alyssa.
Hi, happy to be here.
Hello. Yeah, I'm happy to have you back, of course. I think the last time you were on the show, you were also with Softie, as well as Abe, who just did an episode with Softie as well. Since you're last on, what's been new with you? And how is your thesis been going?
Well, a lot has stayed the same, but also some stuff has changed, I would say. So, mainly more distracted than miniatures than before. They keep releasing new stuff, and then you're like, okay, I don't need it, but they look very good. So maybe I need it, and then you're like, I can't wait. And then they have like combo deal, and then you're like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, fine, and you get more miniatures. I have been slowly getting my thesis now. Back then it was quite vague, and now I would say it has been pinpointed more to a specific topic and how to tackle the topic. So yeah, that's progress, and it's nearly done.
Ooh. I know that I've been accumulating all the Witcher things and then also now New York Rangers hockey merchandise. And like, I feel like it's the same thing every time there's something new. I'm like, but I need it.
Exactly. I
Exactly.
mean, is there space for it? That's the less relevant. Maybe keep it in the box. But you got it
Yeah.
now.
Oh, don't worry. All of my stuff is still in shrink wrap. When it comes to your thesis, what have you pinpointed as both the subject and the argument?
Ooh, right. I'll try to keep it brief, because otherwise I get too much on a tangent. But basically, so the subject is 12th century German missionary going to like the southern Baltic coast, where there's still Slavic pagan people living at that time, and converts them to Christianity. The more remarkable part is that there, shortly after his death, there were three biographies written about him by monks. And not long after, he was also recognized and declared as a saint. So my research is mainly like looking at the three biographies and like comparing them and trying to get conclusions out of it. in that sense, I'm also kind of, I guess, supporting the biographers, those medieval biographers in it. He did some new tactics in his conversion attempts, which partially make him extra interesting because this is also the time of the Crusades and that you can convert people by force. But at the same time, there's also people like my missionary who were still attempting to do it otherwise, more by coercion, I guess, or more like voluntarily, at least relatively voluntarily, definitely for the time, but that I'd say.
Interesting. I feel like that does overlap very nicely with a lot of the subject matter of this chapter, too. And I'm sure we'll get into that. The one other thing, since you're last on the podcast, is you and I met in person.
Yeah.
Yay! That was back in April. It's now end of October. But yeah, such a fun time in the Netherlands, and like glad I got to see you and a couple of other members of the Hansa. And yeah, what a treat it was. We got to visit a castle, we got to eat pancakes, hang out. What else did we do there?
We went through the canals,
We went to a lot of canals.
like that boat ride.
Yeah, we did do a boat ride through a canal. Also very timely with this chapter. Went to a castle.
The windmills.
We went to windmills on the water as well. That was very fun. So that was really nice. And we are, of course, in early discussions about next year's Hansa meetup, sometime in summer 26, most likely in Prague. So definitely keep a lookout for all of that. And Softie, how are you doing?
Yeah, pretty well. Still healing and getting back to fitness again with the walks. Like Dan, I also have a great mountain of shame behind me with unpainted miniatures. Fortunately, I've avoided getting sucked into the Warhammer maelstrom. They add insult to injury by having things that are only released for a limited period, and it's a race to see if you can get them painted in time before they get removed from being officially allowed to be used in competitions and stuff.
Oh, wow. I didn't know
I
that.
keep out of that one.
I would say that it's a relatively rare occurrence. Usually you can still use them. It's mainly that the specific model is maybe not used anymore, but like basically there's a comparable model. It's like it is relatively rare that really stuff gets scrapped.
Do you play in addition to painting them? And
Definitely, I don't paint them enough. Definitely, mine are still gray and soulless in that regard. But I do play them quite a bit. I think that's for me the most enjoyable part.
Yeah, see, this is the change now with the plastics and resins, that now we think of them as all being grey, but they all used to be metal. So the joke used to be that mine are all still in NASA camouflage.
As they're all of my Witcher ones. One day. One day I'll get a chance to paint all of them. Maybe like in my Witcher retirement. That's what I'm going to do. Just like paint all my little Witcher miniatures instead of traveling.
I must admit there is a slight thrill in this chapter when the little boy's toy soldier makes a guest appearance and becomes a plot point.
I am sad though the two of them then disappear out of his collection, but
It's awful, isn't it? Were you not howling at the indignity of that?
I was like, that the Giscard doesn't care about it. I was like, okay, how many toy soldiers does he have that he just can't be like, oh yeah, I can't miss two horsemen? It's like, no, it's his collection.
Yeah, and on that note, today we'll continue our discussion of Andrzej Sapkowski's Tower of Swallows with Chapter 8, in which Redanian spy master Dijkstra seeks gold from Kovir's King Estrad Thyssen, sparking a debate on power, ethics, and neutrality as the North braces for Nilfgaard's spring offensive. Here's a quick synopsis of the chapter from feature Alyssa. Chapter 8 opens with an excerpt from Florence Delanoy's Fairy Tales and Stories, suggesting that in this world, even the purest love must end unhappily. Redanian spy master Sigismund Dijkstra arrives in Land Exeter, the opulent winter capital of Kovir and Povis, seeking financial support for the North's war against Nilfgaard. Once a minor vassal of Redania, Kovir has become the continent's wealthiest neutral state, ruled by King Estrad Thyssen and Queen Zuleika. Dijkstra's mission is straightforward: secure 1 million byzants to fund the Northern War effort. Estrad listens with sharp amusement, challenging the spy's ruthless pragmatism by quoting Visigodo of Corvo on moral blindness and invoking the good book on humility and restraint. Consulting a magical war map, the king foresees Nilfgaard's inevitable advance and doubts the North's chances. Meanwhile, Vade de Redu's mistress Cantarella confirms Nilfgaard's plans for a massive spring offensive to Asir Varanid, who in turn passes the intelligence to the Lodge. Though Estrad refuses to abandon Kovir's policy of neutrality, Queen Zuleika's parables inspire a clever compromise. Decades later, the king's grandson reveals Estrad secretly supported the North by releasing thousands of prisoners to bolster the army and by channeling funds through his share of Novigrad's trade companies, meaning Nilfgaard itself unknowingly financed its opposition. Far into the future, the king and the spy face assassins, each recalling their final exchange. So now that we've gotten a synopsis of the chapter, I'd love to hear both of your overall thoughts and any chapter highlights and lowlights for chapter 8.
My main highlight as a historian was the sort of formation of Kovir. I thought that was fascinating, the history, the build-up to it. That was beautiful. He really goes off on one with that. He really leans into it. He both gives us the background, with all the canals and everything. Straight away you think of Venice, and there's quite a lot in there about Venice putting its power out into the Mediterranean through its naval force and stuff, but it also reminds you very strongly of the Venice of the North with Amsterdam. There's a great deal of that in there as well, so I'm sure Dan can expound on that more, but it's unmistakable. The second wave of people who moved to Kovir and stuff, that's very much the same way as the Dutch provinces when they got their independence and formed the Dutch Republic. It's the same sort of people that are being described there and the same sort of movement behind it. So I loved that. I thought that was terrific.
Yeah, I also think it's also just so funny. Like Sapkowski always tells, my world is just a backstage for the characters, the actors. You don't really need to pay attention to it. And he still spends nearly I would say a quarter of the chapter just describing the entire history of Kovir with even these are the metals that are mined, and this is the so many percentages mined here, and that is there, that is where that's produced. It's such a different chapter in so many ways, but can also say I have to agree with Softie. It's also comparisons with both Venice and also I would say in many ways the Dutch Republic, definitely also Amsterdam. One minor detail that I was also really reminded of is when Dijkstra arrives, that those breakwaters are basically at the dike, and from there smaller riverboats pick you up and go to the city proper.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you both on for this chapter. I think, again, speaking about a subject that really focuses on political neutrality, I was really excited to have you both to talk about that. And I think what stood out for me in this chapter was, I think, the singularity of it. This chapter always stands out and it has grown on me. I think the first time that I read it, I was I kind of like it, but it feels like it's out of place. The more I go back to it, the more I think engrossed I find myself, both in their banter as well as the cleverness of what actually happens in their dialogue and the solution that is ultimately crafted to help Redania and the North in the war efforts. I think a lot to enjoy here, as well as the cut to the sorceresses and to Cantarella, which serves the plot in the very Sapkowski sort of way. So yeah, I think there was a lot to enjoy in this chapter, both from a political sense as well as from a plot standpoint.
I only had one low light as well. There was a bit of clumsy writing, I thought. The only time I think I've actually picked up on any of these was just where Seer of Anahid, when she's with Cantarella, and she suddenly says, I wonder what became of Jedediah Mekasa, who we've never heard of before. Never been named before. He's just being named in time to turn up sort of in another couple of chapters' time. It's almost I think he went back and put him in.
Yeah. I think there were a little bit of things sprinkled around. When we talk about the singularity of this chapter, the need to front load the king's appearance with the entire history of Kovir, as Sapkowski often does, give you just enough to be able to contextualize the rest of the chapter. And as Daniel said, it's a little bit more than usual, or it's more detailed, I think, sometimes than he gets. But it's all these little pieces, I think, that come together later. So a lot of the names that we hear, not just the one that Softie pointed out, but even a few of those impish cats, as they're called, we get a little bit more color to their stories later in the novels.
This is one of those companion piece chapters, isn't it? Where the foundation for a later chapter. Loads and loads of stuff that all the seeds are being sown here to explain something that's going to happen later without it just seeming like exposition at the time. You feel like you were in on the beginning of this. Oh, I know how this happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. In that sense, I would say it also feels quite a bit it should more really be the first chapter of the book, right? For being halfway in the book and suddenly being, okay, let's pause the story for a lot of lore dumping, a lot of setup. In many ways, also definitely pays, I would say, mainly back a lot in Lady of the Lake.
Mm-hmm.
But then feels like it would have been also a great first chapter for Lady of the Lake, maybe, instead of, okay, well, Lady of the Lake is also a great start, but that's beside the point. It feels weird to be halfway in the book having so much setup. It's very strange for the pacing, I would say. But then again, pacing and Sapkowski's are never always good combinations, I'd say. But
I think part of the charm of this chapter is it feels like it's fairly straightforward to begin with. And, it's one of those occasions where you have to keep looking back to the preface and why are those quotes being used at the beginning? That's a steer, And it's only really as it gets towards the end that all the Russian dolls finish popping out and you actually know all of the bits of plot that are buried one inside the other. To think then that this is actually the payoff to what's been happening with the Lodge. A lot of this is harking back to stuff that we last had in Baptism of Fire. The first meeting of the Lodge on the 5th of August, which was done sort of by projection, and then on the 19th they all met in person and stuff. But that's where Siravar Anahid and Sheala de Tancarville met, for instance. I'm calling her Sheala de Tancarville. Tancarville, let's call the whole thing off. I don't know how anyone prefers to do that one. But yeah, so that is interesting that this chapter is taking place in the following October. So this is very much after those events. So it's one of these things in this book where he keeps jumping backwards and forwards through time. And this is almost like future stuff that's happening. This is almost happening at the same time as Ciri's approach to the actual tower and stuff. So it's quite late in the day in the story. So it's kind of why it has to come where it is, because it's going to feed into things that are still due to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as we all have hinted about, it is a chapter that is very rewarding after you've read the series. And as you continue coming back to it, I think there's continually more to mine from what Sapkowski layers in here in chapter 8. Was there anything else that you guys wanted to cover in these highlights and lowlights before we kick off the discussion questions?
One also funny comparison I was just still thinking of, aside from Amsterdam and Venice, right, for Kovir and Povis, I think that's also what thing constantly stuck with me. It felt like there was another country Sapkowski, or another place Sapkowski was referencing. He likes to always reference or pull similarities. I would actually say it's with definitely at least the early United States. It's a place that's relatively, at least weather-wise, is funny enough also a bit colder than Europe, so you're on the same horizontal lines. I forget the not longitudes. Anyway,
either longitude or no, latitude or longitude.
Yeah, but that is definitely at least northern, relatively colder and wetter. It's also a place where a lot of people went from Europe who either were fortune seekers or wanted to express their own ideas, freedom. But also a country that's surprisingly rich in natural resources. Also is very focused on free trade. I think I do have to say, when I at a certain point read that there were gunboats sent to, I think, the Rhodanian coast, I was like, sounds a bit like Admiral Perry to Japan. That sounds, I would say, comparisons to also US start of the First World War being neutral. Sure, in the end, they sent troops and mainly supporting with food and material. It has a lot of comparisons as well, I think.
I think it's a what-if scenario with him as well, because a lot of that he's talking about with the gunboat diplomacy and stuff, he's actually cocking a snoop at the British Empire there, who were terrible to this. And that we got into our head that Britannia rules the waves, and we tried to stop everyone else from trading freely and things. And that instead he's talking about Mare Liberum or what have you, which is, Hugo Grontius. That was from, again, it's the Dutch Republic. That was what was being put forward by the Dutch Republic, that trade should be free. No one should be getting in the way. And it's just what would have happened if, instead of Britain rising to be the big power, what if it had been the Netherlands? How different would the world have been? So I think it's partly that.
Well, the Dutch Republic actually did kick Hugo de Groot into the prison for actually his radical beliefs, because they thought that he was being a bit too also radical with his liberal seas ideas. Funnily enough, at the same time, those ideas of the sea is for everyone, aside from small coastal territory, everything, what we still have nowadays in international maritime law is still mainly based indeed on Hugo's views and maritime law.
Which, as you said, only came into place because of America's rise after the Second World War to actually, replace Britain as the great sea power. These things are all connected.
Yeah, we know Sapkowski as a sort of historian, and so it is interesting to see how much you all, as historians yourself, can glean equally from the text, and how many parallels we can find at all points of history, both modern and ancient. I do appreciate the comparisons to the Americas. I think just because, of course, when they mention the canals, as you both have said, it immediately draws to mind Amsterdam, Venice. And I think mentally I was very stuck there. So I think expanding upon that and seeing how far Sapkowski's references can really be found is the joy of having you guys on. So I appreciate that. So we'll turn to our discussion questions for this chapter. The crux of it really is the conversation and the diplomacy between King Esterad Thyssen and Dijkstra, our favorite Rhodanian spy master. And in their conversation, Estrad quotes Visigoda on moral blindness before calling Dijkstra a, quote, whoreson of upright character. Both the king and the spy claim to serve order while also bending their morality. Estrad demands Kovir neutrality despite funding the war, and Dijkstra practices cruelty in the name of patriotism. What would you guys say their conversation suggests about the illusion of virtue under power and the impossibility of staying clean while ruling a dirty world?
It's a very deep question, that one. The main thing I picked up was Estrad was saying, he doesn't accept the idea that, the end justifies the means, but in a roundabout way. He warns Dijkstra that he's making a terrible legend for himself with what he's been doing at Drakenborg Castle. And he says it doesn't matter that, you're doing it for the good and stuff. All anyone's going to remember is that you were killing people. That's all they're going to need. And it's the same sort of thing with him, really, that he's actually comes up with he doesn't personally, but he has suggested to him a way of dealing with the situation where he can help Redania without compromising Kovir's neutrality, which is by actually going to the hierarch of Novigrad and getting them to lend the money to Redania. The risk is being drawn against his own personal shares in a big trading company that's based in Novigrad. So in that way, he hasn't actually broken neutrality at all. It's not Kovir that's lending the money. It's actually Estrad Tyson is personally underwriting the loan.
With the help of Nilfgaardian contributions as well,
yes.
Which is the irony.
Which, again, he very much builds on that later on in The Lady of the Lake as well, this whole idea that international finance is not really interested in borders and kings and emperors. Money's got its own rules, which you'd expect from Sapkowski.
Yeah, he was an economist originally, right?
Yeah, he's certainly a businessman.
And a merchant, I believe, yeah.
Yeah, he was a fur trader, wasn't he?
Something like that. I know that's where the name Cyrilla came from. It was off of a sweater or jacket at some little shop, I believe, somewhere on in mainland Europe.
With Estrad, he knows that although he may have, not broken the law, so he personally feels okay with what he's done, he's also warning him that, the court of public opinion doesn't work that way. That the fact that they've met is people will put two and two together and they'll both be in trouble from what comes from this.
I feel like in certain ways, Estrad also kind of attempts to talk from a sort of moral high ground towards the Dijkstra at the beginning of the chapter. And I mean, at the beginning of the chapter, you also get the idea, okay, yeah, that's totally correct. He's even described good looking at everything, stereotyping of, good looking people being correct, narratively speaking. Also throughout the chapter, you also see actually indirectly, but still funds the war effort. He's not being neutral. He told even his wife, actually concerned. Dijkstra was right. I want to actually fight back. He has quite a few people in prison. One of them being of a deposed king. I forgot the name of that king, but so okay. Probably another Tyson, since the Tysons followed the Troydonids. I don't know. Sapkowski never elaborates, but it is also so clear, okay, so the story is not fully fair. I guess Estrad doesn't have the moral high ground he lectures Dijkstra about, I'd say. They're both men dealing in shady stuff, but being honest to each other.
Yeah, I think that the description of just a whoreson of upright character feels like it encapsulates that whole argument of just doing questionable things for quote unquote the greater good. And I appreciate that Estrad is able to specifically point to I don't know if the ends justify the means, while also spending the chapter figuring out a clever way to both keep his public image, given his warning to Dijkstra he's clearly very acutely aware of, while also cleverly figuring out a way to move around resources, both in terms of personage and finances, in order to help the cause. Even though they both have almost the same kind of disregard for their own policies in some way, it is, as the question suggests, that illusion of virtue. Kovir is still seen as neutral despite anything that happens in backroom dealings. Whereas for Dijkstra, his virtue is Redanian order. And so it's more about power, as we see in Drakenborg, as you said, Softie. But I do think it's a sliding scale. We have a previous chapter where Geralt confronts the prefect of Amarillo, Fulco, and they go back and forth on how on a local level, basically gratuitous violence just breeds both contempt as well as controversy and corruption. So I do think there is kind of an interesting tension between the possibilities of what could happen when you try to impose order. Does it create this like very roguish underworld, or is it actually true order up and down the chain?
It's also interesting that their mutual regard for one another is based on the strength that each of them has, the other one seems to be immune to. So Dijkstra point is thinking, I've tried several times to put some incredibly attractive agents both near to him and in fact under him, and I've got nowhere with it. So somehow his faithfulness to his wife is a virtue he hasn't been able to get round, so he's impressed by that.
Yeah.
And then you've got Kovir's great strength is that it's got 80% of the continent's gold is there, so they are fabulously wealthy. And he just says, you've never taken a farthing. I know, that you've never taken a bribe. Anyone else I could usually buy, but I can't buy you. You're that rare thing. You're actually genuinely care about your country. Like you're a true patriot.
Yeah.
So those two both actually like each other for that.
And I think it's the unapologetic attitude of like, this is who I am, and I don't really care what you think about it. This is how I operate in the world. And I think there is a respectful attitude toward that kind of honesty where they don't seem to actually have like a mask. So they're not doing this big song and dance around trying to figure out who the other is and what each other wants. One of the exchanges I found quite funny is the king asks Dijkstra, like, oh, how are things, other than the need for money? And Dijkstra's like, well, other than the need for money, everything's good. So there's very little pretense. And I do think that the honesty and the respect is a lot of that.
It's also very fitting, like, at the beginning, that also Esther Tyson, like, doesn't beat around the bush and says, I know you were originally going to talk to my Minister of Foreign Affairs. I know that you were going to try to bribe him. With how much were you going to bribe him? Just be honest, and then I'll go and be honest too. It was just immediately, I know you're going to bribe it. Just be honest. And Dijkstra was also immediately like, okay, this is how we're going to play. And he was also being honest back. So it was quite immediately, like, basically playing with open cards.
Yeah. And then at the end, the king is like, what happened to that 1,000 Novigradian crowns that you were going to give him? Give them to me. I'm not above a bribe. It's delightful. But I think ultimately, to get back to the question, like, it is the moral gray in which Sapkowski plays, isn't it? Just like to be virtuous and to have that be an illusion, but it's for the greater good. And there really is no cleanliness in this very compromising sort of world and war.
I would also say his opinion comes about, thinking about and justifies the means, is, I would say, in certain ways also answered at the end of the chapter with both ending their stay in power surrounded by assassins.
Yeah.
I mean, Esther being stabbed, Dijkstra being surrounded by them. It's already clear, like, okay, sure, they had that power, they had that flare of invulnerability around them because of their imago, but in the end, the knife will pierce through that veil and still end it.
Mm-hmm.
The fact they've gone into it with open eyes, though, that they know that that's the likely ending of this, and the characters they both are, if you went back and told them this is what would happen, they would both accept it, I think, being the people that they are.
Yeah. I know this is a Witcher podcast, not a Star Wars one, but like a fitting quote from the recent or relatively recent show Andor, one of the big rebel leaders, played by Skarsgård, but he's ruthless, right? He's ready to commit terrorist acts, do robberies, as long as the rebellion happens. And when someone asks him, yeah, but why are you willing to go so far? And he says, I'm fighting for a sunrise I'll never see.
Yeah.
Kind of the same mentality, like, we are fighting for something. Definitely Dijkstra, he's like willing to go commit so much atrocities to make sure that Redania keeps surviving, knowing that he will never, like, he will be remembered not for saving Redania, but for the murders he committed and the torture to keep Redania free.
Estrat has a very cutting view of the people who've supposedly running Redania now. Obviously, Dijkstra and Philippa are really running Redania, but the people who are supposedly in charge now, where Estered is just saying they're a bunch of pissy knickered cowards, they're going to run off and kiss Emir's pearl slippers or just flee. Whereas you've crossed the sea in winter, you're the one who's come here, cap in hand, prepared to be ashamed to ask for money and things. That's that regard he has for him.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as we continue our discussion of moral high ground, we get to Queen Zuleika and the Good Book. And the Queen's constant quoting of the Good Book blurs devotion, affection, and diplomacy. How does her moral compass really complement or complicate the king's pragmatism and his decisions over the course of the chapter?
I would say like that it is both complicated, but also definitely also complements it. Like it complicates it a little bit because, for example, like at the beginning, I would say Esther is trying to do a bit of power play towards Dijkstra. It'd be like, hey, Zuleba, Zuleika, what is your opinion on this and all that stuff? That she's quite offhanded about it, like not really engaging as much with the banter, like
Hmm.
trying to stay more like I guess aloof and more seemingly more pious. So in that sense, I would say in certain ways, as was the start of the conversation, weakens a bit. But at the same time, it's also very clear that she also like slightly, I guess, manipulates him with the dreams to help, her son Tancred. But it's also she gives the impression like she cares about him and counsels her in her own way with the guidance she has in her book. I would say in certain ways like that, maybe because like in medieval world like this is like in a patriarchal society, a woman doesn't have like the power maybe as in diplomacy or in warfare, that kind of stuff, because they're not allowed to have that. She has found the power through the good book and is channeling that towards helping Esterad and her family and her kingdom. So it is, I would say, in certain ways also her form of also expressing agency, I guess.
Yeah, very much so. And it's the fact that she speaks with parables is great because they have to be you have to translate that. You have to work out what it's trying to tell you. And the characters say, it's a fine line, depending on how you go with it. It's either foolishness or wisdom.
Yeah.
So you have to be a bit cautious with it. But I think it's the only way that any control could possibly be put on Esterad. He's very proud. He likes to consider himself the man of action and the man with all the knowledge and control at his fingertips. So this idea of just nudging him quietly, just saying, well, here's a story, from the prophet Lebiod, and you can draw what truths you like from it, and he likes to be told these things and sleep on it. He wouldn't want to be told what to do.
Right.
But he likes to be given it as a puzzle so that he still feels like, this is my choice. I've decided to do this. And thank you, my wonderful wife, for sharing this little nugget of wisdom with me.
Yeah.
I mean, he also does also even specifically asks her to look something up in a book, like trusting her to find something. Although I'd say at certain beginning, I was thinking like, well, are they really having a affectionate relationship? I don't know. At first, it wouldn't say I didn't get that impression,
Mm.
but definitely like in that bedchamber scene, it's very clear that he at least fully trusts her, which I think is also like a very clear way to show how affectionate they are towards each other. They do trust each other fully.
Yeah. I think it's funny, at least in my own little head, reading this chapter, because I think based on their descriptions alone, I imagine this very big, booming, sort of like rambunctious sort of Viking, which is not the voice that Peter Kenny gives Esther Addison at all. So I imagined him almost like the dad in like How to Train Your Dragon, just very boorish and loud, and then just a little Puritan woman with her little bonnet in the corner. Very, very different lands and very different periods of time, but that's kind of what I see in my head when I read this chapter. I don't know if you've listened to the audiobook of Estrad. It's kind of upper crust in its own sort of way. I don't know if you'd agree, Softie.
Yeah. It's tricky, though, because he's also kind of makes him a figure of fun at times because he's rearranging his chapeau on his head and stuff.
Yeah. Let's see.
Do you hear, Zuleika, what he's saying? And do you know, Dijkstra, that to have 1 million and not to have 1 million is 2 million together?
I imagined him very different.
It's a bit too sleek.
Yeah. I imagined him being like, 1 million byzants?
Yeah.
Something more like that.
He would play it up.
Yeah. 1 million? Yeah.
Or maybe, like that one guy from Austin Powers, like, 1 million byzants?
I love the thing where he's in the bedroom, he likes to play with his scepter.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, really? Don't we all? But he'd be worried about doing it in public in case, the populace laughed at him.
Yeah. Again, when I've read it, like without listening to the audiobooks, he comes across as being like a little bit, not necessarily flamboyant in terms of like the sexual way, but just kind of like a little bit theatrical. and just like sitting here playing with his sword instead of like a fidget spinner or something, like needing to kind of like do something and get his energy out. So I think that's kind of why I imagined him. And then you've got Zuleika in the corner, just like with all of her introversion and her little crochet and her little good book and her Puritan sensibilities and behavior.
The extrovert and the introvert of the couple.
Yes.
That was something that struck me at the time, was you get that description of her. For a plain, sort of slightly dumpy, short woman, she does that thing that women of her kind do, which is they dress in a way that wouldn't allow you to not mistake them for their own grandmother. And I thought, that was so cutting. I thought, he's heard that from a woman, hasn't he? There's no one else could be quite so vicious to another woman. I don't think.
That was a funny description.
Yeah, real zinger, that one.
Yeah, that one made me laugh.
Yeah, it reminds me also like that one that then Estra's like today story. Yeah, the way he talked is just like when back in my day when I was like a young little lad, and then Dijkstra is like internally, yeah, but you're like just 6 years older than I am.
Yeah.
You're like, fine,
Yeah.
fine, sure, but
Yeah, I think you're right. Dijkstra, who's as a larger man, is feeling quite, alpha maled out of it, isn't he? By the big physicality in it. He thinks he can smell the sea coming off him like some big booming sea captain. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's why I imagined him being a little bit more Viking-ish or Viking adjacent. I guess like more in the world of like Croc, dark Croc.
I was thinking of him more like Peter Stuyvesant with his big. Well, actually, he's got a peg leg, hasn't he? So that's probably not the best. You know what I mean? That kind of sea captain.
Yeah. I think the interesting thing about going back to the Good Book and their relationship and also the Queen's, I can't tell if she has a strategic mindset or not. We know over the course of the chapter that she's in leagues with Sheala de Tancarville, one of the sorceresses, and is conspiring, to create a better life for her son. At the same time, she's clearly picking these excerpts from the Good Book with some direction and sees them as an answer. So when Estrad is like, what do I do? She's like, take half a watermelon. And he's like, what do you mean, woman? But I wonder how much of her selection of quotes is truly analytical and strategic. Does she have the solution in mind when she actually goes to find those quotes? Or is it really just, this is the closest thing and maybe this will spark something in your little head, but I don't really have anything in mind? Or is it more pointed and strategic than that? I actually don't know. So I can't tell how analytical she is when she's going to actually pick these, or if this is close enough, you're going to get something out of this parable no matter what you choose to do. And I think it's that kind of like muddling where people can obviously read the same passage and come to two very separate conclusions or more. I wonder how much of that is truly thought through and how much Zuleika is influencing the politics of Kovir.
I think it's a team effort, isn't it?
Mm.
Because we know that Estrad is not happy to have sorcerers trying to run things. He clearly likes magic because he's got all his magic PowerPoint presentation and things all set up by them. But he's controlling that. He doesn't have a court wizard coming in and, make it do the thing. It's like, no, I'll point this and, and the map shows and, then I can look wise and press the magic button and say the spells and things. So he's doing all of that himself, which is great.
Yeah.
But he's got no one running it for him. So no tech from the wizards. Sheala de Tancarville is off in is described as being a very run-down part of the palace that she's lurking in, because he talks about her at one point by name, and says, Sheala de Tancarville got our own Philippa Eilhart, growing in our bosom, it's like, keep an eye on that one. So he would be absolutely appalled if he knew that the advice was coming from her. So I think what's happening is Shayla's saying, this is where we need it to go. This is what needs to happen. But you, with your knowledge of the Good Book, you nudge your husband in that direction. And I think that's the way it's working. I don't think she could, be given the quotes to read out. She just needs to know how to nudge him. So she knows her book well enough to know any scripture that she could pull out to support that.
Yeah, I also don't think the sorceresses, any of them give me the impression that they would actually read the Good Book. I feel like they would call it like drivel for the peasants or something. That's the it's very clearly liking Dijkstra because Dijkstra is smart and willing to sort of also like engage with him in wordplay and like having a clashing of minds. And the same way, I do think that if Zuleika was really just purely like a vessel for the sorceresses and doesn't have that, I would say maybe wisdom or intelligence to actually spar with Estrad, they wouldn't be so close together. I think that Ezra likes that she compliments him and is able also to like that she brings that wisdom from herself is I think maybe not explicitly like needed, but it's also I think that fits more. I'd say with like why Estrid and her would love each other so much because they listen to each other, but they are also willing to debate each other. I'd say.
I think there is like a kind of continual beauty both between the king and his wife and the king and Dijkstra with like how they sort of inspire each other and just even following the king's kind of like internal monologue sort of over the course of the chapter is fascinating, both from the perspective of Dijkstra, his wife, as well as his grandson, and like really seeing everything that kind of impacts what he chooses to do and how he chooses to supplement the war. So, as we continue on, the king and the queen's affectionate marriage is a rare image of war in a cold, strategic world. How does their marriage humanize that political debate? And why does Sapkowski pair this with an opening epigraph claiming love must end unhappily? The chapter doesn't really mince words at all. The king loved the queen boundlessly, and she loved him with all her heart. Something so fair had to finish unhappily. And then it goes on to talk about the author in that sense, Florence Delanoy. He also says that in addition to his fairy tales and stories, he also wrote quite a lot about The Witcher Girl, The Endless Search, The Myth of the Elder Blood, and so on.
Yeah, that's a big winner for me because I love these little passages at the beginning of chapters, and to have Florence Delanoy quote and then to have my favourites, Effenberg and Talbot, actually their little entry in their encyclopedia telling us who Florence Delanoy was. It's just the perfect double whammy. It's having a bit of a joke here that, Florence Delanoy, famously the person who's always collecting the fairy tales and stuff, he comes across this beautiful love story and says, well, that's too good to be true. It has to be paid for. No good turn goes unpunished, It's got like a lovely little joke to it, I think. It has to come at a cost. I think we're being led a little bit by the nose here as well, with the Russian dolls that are taking place, with all the way the plots all tie together, that on the surface it's very romantic that, Zuleika and Estrid have got this lovely close relationship and are able to talk to one another like this. But then the price that's being paid here is that their son, Tancred, has gone off the rails a bit. So Sheala has actually got Zuleika's support by offering to come in and straighten him out, that we can save your son for you. Although this is a different royal family, they're not the original ones. The original ones, the Troidanids, were literally the foundation story is that the brother of Radovid I was such an immoral and bestial man that he wanted him as far away from him as possible. Now, this is obviously fantasy. You couldn't imagine in this day and age that a king would have a brother who behaves so appallingly that they'd want to keep him out of the public eye, can you? I mean, that's just fantasy. So I don't know where he gets his ideas like that from. I end up with a very strong suspicion on this with Sheala de Tancarville, is that it's 120 years since the first Lanexeter Treaty, which decided that, Kovir is going to be neutral. No one can draw on it. We want to see freedom of the seas. No one should be interfering with anyone else's vessels in the pursuit of trade. They have this enormous 30,000 standing army to back this up. This isn't just an opinion. This is, well, we could fight about it if you like, and no one else has anything like this. Sheala de Tancarville, though, when we first hear about her, is she misses out on the Thaneth coup because she's far too busy doing her research and stuff, hasn't got time for this nonsense, so she doesn't turn up for that. She is then invited to join the lodge and says, why haven't you invited, Istred and people like that? And then is told, because they're men. So, okay. So she goes along with that a little bit. But again, she says, my work is important to me. I don't want to be wasting my time here. If you've brought me in to be like the balance of power between, the people who are fighting for the North and those for Nilfgaard, I'm not doing that for you. When they start squabbling again, she shouts at them and frightens them. She threatens them all. She says, if anyone betrays this group, they've got me to deal with. And we then see from Tris Merigold's eyes, she says, oh, and she could do it too.
Yeah.
She's super powerful, Sheala de Tancarville, and she just likes to be left alone to get on with her work. That's all she wants to do. And it makes you wonder, this whole policy, this incredibly powerful country with all this money and this standing army and stuff, why does it go neutral and stuff? is this not maybe the sign that there's this powerful sorcerer there who's been manipulating things in the background to have a quiet life? This is exactly what she wants. The reason she knows she can get young Tancred to go straight and stuff is that she's already controlling Esterad. That's the reason he's so devoted to Zulika and stuff, he could already be being manipulated for all we know. That, although I'd like to think that it's a beautiful love story, I think that's being dangled in front of us as well as a possibility. That how far back does this go? That we don't know how old Sheala is, but that's my theory on it. I think she's been doing this for the long haul.
Interesting.
So it's not just a recent development.
That's a big theory.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You think back to when the lodge meets and stuff, and they come up with the plan for Ciri to marry her off to Tancred. And she says, oh, yeah, that's no problem. I can get him to fall in love with her easily. It's like, I've done this before. This is not a hard thing at all.
Yeah, I think I always assumed that her inputs into the kingdom were very much just like, I think to your point, Softie, like, I just want to have some peace, God damn it. But I assumed, I think, when I read the passage that it would just kind of be your standard coercion threats or just like a little sprinkling of magic. You're just going to completely forget Tancred, or you're just going to be threatened out of your relationship with him. I actually assumed that she would be influencing his entire social sphere and not just so that they turned their backs on him. That was what I assumed when I read that.
I just thought it was a bit clumsy. She gives herself away with the dreams that she's giving to Esterad, because Zulika says, oh, please be careful with that. And that's actually the start of the book, it's that Esterad, Tyson and Zulika, it's some of the people who jump out of bed with the sudden thing. And it's like, but they don't know Ciri. It's magical feedback that they're getting from Sheala de Tancarville. It's extraordinary, that idea that, it's almost like she's, with my ridiculous theory, is that, that she's trying to settle Zulika down. It's like, see, I couldn't possibly be manipulating because, people can tell when I'm doing that.
Yeah.
It's like, you can trust me. I'm just here. I'm just your friend,
Yeah.
But it certainly also explains, the ending. It's either the greatest love story ever told, that he, as his great nephew, relates in later life, that he shields Zulika with his body and takes the assassin's blades. He could have run, he could have fought back, but all he cared about was looking after her. That's either a very, very beautiful story, or he's been so imprinted with, look after Zulika, don't cheat on her. So, that it wouldn't occur to him to do anything but try and protect her.
Yeah, I think it is that question of must love end unhappily. And is that, presumably it is, a tragic ending where you have him, sacrificing himself on the steps to the palace. It contains the chapter, completely, going through both the origins of Kovir as well as the fall of the king who we spend the whole chapter with. I think hearing that little epilogue from his grandson or grandnephew, it doesn't sound, in terms of legacy, that his reign was unhappy or that his time was unhappy. So I think it is very rewarding, over the course of the chapter and in retrospect. How does Sapkowski use the cut between Dijkstra's mission in Kovir and Cantarella's espionage to illustrate that knowledge, not armies, drives the world's fate? How does he portray knowledge as both a weapon and a burden in this war?
The choices made partially, I would definitely also say, of Sapkowski, because he likes just cutting always between stories and stuff, just on the pure, I guess, aesthetic part. But it's also definitely showing that at the same time while we see Dijkstra and Estrad basically playing open cards with each other, being honest and just assessing the situation. At the same time, yeah, you see then espionage happening, and well, on one side, you see the two kingdoms playing basically open-handed political play. At the same time, the Empire is in one of the most intrigued with Rella doing espionage, Emir slowly figuring out that there's an entire, not per se coup happening, but that there is a conspiracy might be happening against him, and that also the sorceresses are busy. You notice that's at the same time the thing that seems to in a unified monolith is the most divided internally. Everyone fighting for their own piece of the pie, but at the same time, on the other side of the continent, there is actually unity between groups which are, at least at first hand, seem not to have no reason to stand so united.
I really love the cut here just because the scene with Cantarella happened a couple of chapters ago. We saw it from Verrier's perspective when he was just trying to go home. He first got berated by the Emperor, and then he got picked up by Rince. Then he just wanted to go hang out with his mistress, and then he wanted to go home. And he had such a long day. And so I think it's funny to hear from the other side the cut between Dijkstra and Estrad, and then go to Cantarella speaking to Asir. And I think it's a fun dynamic to see Cantarella with her mentor, and also to just be demonstrated how acutely sharp her military and strategic knowledge is, that she is able to peruse these maps while Vadier is asleep, and then also surmise what's going to happen based on them. And I think it's really important that through the interplay of these two scenes, we're able to understand that Estrad is right, that all of this is becoming, at least in the upper circles of these war rooms, like kind of common knowledge as to what is going to happen and how Nilfgaard is going to move forward in the spring. So it implies that there's a very consistent basis of knowledge. We know what Nilfgaard's going to do. We know that Redania knows. We know that Kovir knows. We know that the Lodge knows. So I do think it is, the word of the season, very efficient.
I love that bit with the sequences with Cantarella, because you'll find this hard to believe. I got dragged down a little rabbit hole. When I first heard the name, I thought it was the name for artificial sweetener, but that's Cantarell. Oh. But that's what I thought of when I first heard the name.
Yeah,
so I thought, what a clever idea, to name this artificially sweet character. I thought that was brilliant. But actually, Cantarella is the name of an arsenic-based poison that the Borgias used to use to assassinate people. So actually, it's an even cleverer name than I thought it was. Because I thought maybe it was to do with Cantar for singing. I thought it was that she had a very sweet voice or something. There's lots of reasons it could have been, but that's actually the real etymology of it. That was interesting in and of itself, but it was also the fact that it's actually a jump back in time for their conversation. Yeah. That happened a little while ago. And so Cantarella passes all this knowledge on to Asira, who we know from when the Lodge first meet in person on the 19th of August. He makes a point of saying that Sheala and Asira Anahid are drawn towards one another and get on very well because they're both very deep scholars. We've then got the connection between those two, that all this knowledge is passed straight across through the Lodge, and that might be one of the ways that Estrad Tyson's getting his up-to-date knowledge of exactly who's leading who in the coming summer offensive. Because although people are all talking about it at the Wells, as Cantarella says, then Asira by Anahid says, well, it's a shame you couldn't have found out who's going to be leading these different groups. Well, it just so happens that I had a look at the maps and read the plan. So, yeah, I do know who's going to do that. And, drops the bombshell that Marshal Cohorn's going to be leading the Central Army. That's going to be the main push. But on the east flank, we're going to have the Eastern Group.
Ardo Abdahi.
There we are. Then Marshal de Vet.
I mean, the main bad guy in Thronebreaker, so that's why I always remember him. And the Wet I always remember because in Gwent, but like not Thronebreaker, but like in the standalone Gwent, the Wet's card is always a very annoying, well-played card of the Nilfgaard player. So it's like, because I played Gwent before I got later into the books, so it's like, that's what he was doing.
One of the de Vets turns up in The Witcher 1 as well. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Cantarella in The Witcher 3.
There you go.
I do have to say, I do pity Cantarella. Like, she also says at a certain point that she kind of wants to just continue with her studying and stuff.
Yeah.
Do I have to play the airhead any longer?
Yeah. Exactly. Like, sure, in certain ways also she gets powered by being a spy, but at the same time, she also has to sort of like, is being put into a role she clearly doesn't like because she listens to her mentor. And I think in that sense, I kind of pity Cantarella quite a bit.
Yeah. I mean, she's literally being asked to breast boobily in front of the the upper echelons of Nilfgaardian society. And it sounds like that contradicts with how she sees herself, which seems to be as a scholar first and foremost. So those two things don't have to be mutually exclusive, but it sounds like for her they are.
As well as her being named after a poison used in political assassinations, there's the fact that he's chosen the currency that they use in Kovir as the bizant, which is the one, used to be used by the Byzantine Empire. And, they're still like a watchword, that's a Byzantine plot,
Yeah.
to say something's really complicated and slightly dodgy. So he's really, really good at this, let's be honest.
Yeah, Byzantine art was the art that I hated most in art history class. Just the gold background and everybody's little hands out. And I'm like, this is so boring.
The gold was the point, though.
What indeed, other than to be flash and show off 80% of the world's gold, I guess.
The Bezants are so famous now because, the reason that we know about so much about them is that, Viking hordes keep being dug up with them in, because so many of the Vikings used to sail down the rivers to actually serve in the Varangian Guard for the Byzantine Empire, because they just simply couldn't trust their own soldiery. So they used to get these northern barbarians in who used to fight for the death, loyally for the emperor.
Also thinking about this part, right? Because at a certain point, Cantarella mentions, is then, the two generals leading the eastern and western flanks are the main leaders of the conspiracy against Edmure.
Mm-hmm.
And then Asire says, our emperor is either very naive or very cunning. So I was kind of wondering if you guys, what do you guys think? Is he being naive or very cunning by sending his two greatest internal rivals to the front?
It's what he's got them doing, isn't it? I think that's the key.
Yeah, I would assume he's being cunning. Based on everything that we know of the Emperor, there's no way he did this by accident or without thinking about it. I feel like someone's definitely being punished.
I mean, what he's got them doing, if you look at it, Abdar, he's supposed to be doing like a spoiling attack on the eastern wing, so to stop Cadwin getting involved in the fight. So when Cohorn pushes it through into Temeria, the idea is to stop them coming in on the flank. And then on the Special Western Task Force, they've got to go and capture the south bank of the Pontar to finish off, sort of cutting off Novigrad, and also to stop river traffic getting up to supply Vizima. So they're both of them a really tough ask. I mean, the Western group has to go all the way up the side of Broccolon Forest, for instance, got to fight through all that marshy terrain and stuff. So the idea is they're being kept as far away as possible from where the glory is going to be. But hey, when there's blame to be heaped out, if anything goes wrong, perfect. So he's definitely got it sorted.
Although I do have to say, personally, since it is still, the Nilfgaardian Empire is very clearly modeled after the Roman Empire, I think it's at the same time also quite risky to get 2/3 of your armies into the hands of your biggest rivals, away to the front lines, and be like, okay, good luck. Because if they have too much luck, or even too much bad luck, they might decide, okay, let's just turn around 180 and march back to Nilfgaard itself and get someone else to be the emperor. Yes, that's what Roman generals are quite good at doing. And I get the impression, is it already in this book? Maybe it's one of the later ones. It also mentions, one of the preambles before chapter, quick succession of multiple emperors. It also kind of shows, being an emperor is not a very stable and secure job to have in the Nilfgaard.
So as we wrap up our discussion of this chapter, in the future, both Estrad and Dijkstra remember their farewell as they face down assassins. How does this symmetry turn the chapter's political negotiation into a meditation on justice, fate, and the cost of strategy?
Yeah, I think for Estrad, it's kind of has to finally pay his due for either annoying the Lodge or the Nilfgaard, in my opinion. Because at least I think, personally, that either Nilfgaard found out and decided, all right, now it's time to get rid of someone who promised to be neutral, or we have molded Tancred now enough in our own goal, it's time to remove the one who we have to indirectly manipulate, and it's taking too long.
Or it might be Leeuwarden and the Nilfgaardian Merchants Guild realised that, hey, that was our money. Make a fool out of us.
Yeah. The thing about Estrad's assassination is that we get so little information about it. We hear about the actual killing through his grandson, but we don't know anything about who sent the assassins and what their motivations are. So it could be something in theory, as innocuous as oh no, this is a very rich king and we just want to kill this very rich king. And it could be a peasant uprising. It could be something else, or it could be much more politically motivated, as both of you have pointed out. I wonder what Dijkstra and Estrad's farewell meant to him in that moment, even as he's defending Zuleika.
They certainly foretold at the time that this was the kind of thing that was going to come of it. Mm-hmm. That there was no messing around with that. Saying, how people are going to judge you and stuff, the legend you leave behind and stuff, that this stuff, it's certainly Estrad as a ruler, was showing like quite a mature approach to it all. This understanding, that history's written from the point of view of the leaders are everything. And then Sapkowski's showing us, the sinews underneath that. It's like, the sinews of war is endless wealth and stuff. Lots of people have talked about it over time that, everyone talks about the general, but no one talks about the guy who put all the food in the soldiers' bellies and got them their equipment and stuff. And that's actually the person who got it to happen. And he seems to have more of an understanding of that, because he was, you've got to worry about what people think. It's all very well to do things, but do watch yourself.
Yeah. And I think it ties together a lot of the themes and excerpts we've seen throughout our discussions. So, like, the idea of love being so good that it must end unhappily, as we spoke about earlier, or even the idea of pursuing order, or the ends justify the means. So I wonder if, from the other side, I'm sure Estrad's assassination was the pursuit of order for somebody as well. So the kinds of people that he and Visigoda condemn, I wonder if that's also like an example of that coming to fruition too.
Yeah, there's an interesting thing that I haven't picked up the first few times I read the book, but reading it again this time in preparation, I don't know how I hadn't picked up on it, but Effenberg and Talbot, my buddies, when they're talking about Florence Delanoy, point out that he was writing the legends of the northern people of the empire, and it's like, oh God, that means that these kingdoms will end up being swallowed by an empire. But is it the Koviran Empire or is it the Nilfgaardian one? So that isn't answered. But ultimately, that Redania and Temeria's independence is going to disappear one way or the other. And again, he hasn't told us which way that goes. I found that quite painful to read, having missed it before.
I think it's actually, at least my theory, it's not original, I've seen it before, someone else mentioned. But right, the thing is, the North, or like the cultural North in Sapkowski's world, isn't starting above the Yaruga. Like, I think it was even slightly like the first kingdoms right below the Amal Mountains, so below Sintra, are also considered part of the North. And with Geralt also as a Witcher being always going over the entirety of the North and all the those people having same history from coming from the ships and the magic style and everything. You could also say, at least saying, hoping that those kingdoms stay independent, that Delanoy, he went to like the northern reaches of the empire, but like if Sintra or like the areas like staying after the first Nilfgaardian War, he could have also just only gone up there and asked, hey, what are your guys' stories about the Witchers, right? Because Geralt has had a quite big impact already in Sintra with Palanti and Pavetta, thank you. Like and the first the big dinner in Sword of Destiny. So you could maybe, as far as we know, we could also the northern reaches of the Empire can still be below the Yaruga, as far as we know.
Yeah.
I'm going to seize on your theory and hope that it balms me and gives me a good night's sleep.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Aside from, the racism, misogyny, and poverty, and all the things, I am a big fan of the Northern Kingdoms. So I also do cling on every single straw I can grasp on for their independence.
Yeah.
Actually, if you want for extra assurance of a good night's sleep, in Baptism of Fire, I think around one of the later chapters, I think even our chapter we did last season, at a certain point you have that narrator telling those kids about the story of Geralt.
Yeah, that was yours, chapter 7.
Yeah, and it was like 100 years after the events in the books. You mentioned the kids being scared about the idea of like armed riders coming from the south, crossing the rivers to invade them. But they wouldn't think that, right? If Nilfgaard was already in control, because then they wouldn't need to be afraid of riders of the south.
I think Delanoy is writing 200 years after the events, though, isn't he? And Effenberg and Talbot are referring to him as this great historical figure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you know when Effenberg and Talbot, when their excerpts are from? Softie, does it ever say?
I don't remember it saying. I'm going to have to look it up now. That's it. That's my task.
Oh. Yeah, well, I think what we're told of Delanoy is he was born in Vicovaro, which is where Kovir is from, famously, in 1432. And then, as both Daniel and I have said, his most important works are Myths and Legends of the Peoples of the North, Fairy Tales and Stories, The Surprise or the Myth of the Elder Blood, A Saga About a Witcher, and The Witcher and the Witcher Girl or The Endless Search, which doesn't feel like it bodes well as readers. Yeah, but I think like going back to Estrad and Dijkstra, one of the things that I really appreciate about this chapter, as I said, really is the back and forth in the dialogue and the puzzle, like the puzzle fitting of how their strategic actions take shape. The chapter as a whole ends up being about both that journey and, as we said, like the cost of it, that presumably it results in assassination attempts on both of them. And at the time, it seems like the best course of action based on the knowledge that they have. And I think because we have, established at the beginning of our discussion that we consider them to be honest figures and well-intentioned, albeit a little bit morally murky figures, that it's something that they're both very aware of and that they accept to some extent. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Dijkstra's looking for, the actual survival of Redania. It's a possible, end event for them. So that's fair enough. And as far as Esterrad's concerned, what's his problem? Well, he's into free trade and everything. And the idea that Nilfgaard takes over everywhere isn't actually a good ending for that. Who exactly are you trading with? You are literally next. And although he makes the very good point that if you make a treaty with someone, it's like a marriage, and fear of being a cuckold shouldn't stop you being a marriage. You've got to be a husband first, which I thought was a terrific little point. They're sowing the seeds here for the ability to fight back against the Emperor. And it's really interesting, that when they do the analysis on it, that he knows exactly how many soldiers they've got in the Temerian and Redanian forces. So he knows what they can put in the field. And he says, well, Aden had the same amount and Lyria, and that didn't make any difference. So you can't go with the same thing. You're going to lose. What you need is trained, available seasoned troops. And there's that lovely thing that comes up with the advice from Zulica about, the impious cats and letting all these future heroes out of jail and stuff and sending them off. And that Estrad actually adds that little touch to it. And he says, and the other thing that no one thinks about is cats always come home, which is the thing that Visigotta keeps going on about, that his cat will always come home as well.
Yeah.
And that when they come home, they'll bring their spoils and riches with them, and I'll tax the bastards.
Oh, I love that tie back to Visigotta too, like the second one of this chapter. It is so interesting to explore those parables and return back, because they do it I know it's big fucking stakes, but there is kind of a joy in piecing this together, and it's fun for us to read and it's fun to discuss.
Also, a fun little callback I was just also thinking of, I felt oh yeah, nice that they remember that this chapter doesn't stand alone, is when Dijkstra is walking up the stairs and he constantly still feels his broken ankle from Geralt's little parting gift, it's just a little detail, but I felt like it is also kind of a nod from Sapkowski, don't worry, we'll also get back to Geralt, but for now, this is I'll reference him like this, okay guys? We're gonna have this big chapter. I'm gonna tell you about the economy of Kovir. I'm gonna tell you about these politics, the armies. But I promise you, I'm not forgotten Geralt exists.
Yeah. I think, Softie, to what you were saying too, I feel like it is an exercise of just unseen consequence. You've talked about the crossbows that were stolen, the crossbow convoy that was stolen throughout our discussion of the book. And I feel like it's similar here where, as we said, this is a slight sidestep as a foundational chapter, but we do get to see that we'll meet these heroes one day and they're going to have a huge cultural impact, as well as apparently a economical one on the country as well. And so, yeah, even his grandson is we couldn't have known it at the time, but those impish cats were, the future heroes to young children. Even I myself wanted to be this special Canteri, yeah.
It was always the flaw in the plan, wasn't it? It's okay, so you're going to borrow this money. Where the hell are you going to get these trained soldiers from? And it's marking a change in military service as well. That you've got all the lords and barons and people raising the armies at the moment in the northern kingdoms, and that Kovir has a standing army,
25,000 strong. Crazy. Yeah.
And this is the pattern from the Italian states and things, that this became the way of fielding armies, that you'd actually pay for condottieri to come and fight for you. sometimes actually keep them. So half
Yeah.
of them would be on the books and half of them would be drawn up every time there was a fighting season.
But you do kind of then take the risk, if definitely with the Condocherry, is that they then also have the problem that since they are only loyal to gold, what if then at a certain point the leader of the company decides that he could maybe be the better leader of the city because, if the city can't defend itself. In certain ways, like also like Estred funding and arming his biggest local rivals, I feel, is also he's actually taking quite a bigger risk than he actually says in the book, because even if they're successful, which they seemingly are in whatever task they had, when they return, they could also just still decide to do something about someone who was first their rival. But I do think at the same time that doesn't happen, because if Eswed would have been assassinated by his political rivals, like locally, then I don't think his son, who was apparently also still described as a duke, that's a Giscard, that he would be able to talk so calmly about it, Doesn't feel like, oh yeah, he was assassinated and then we had a massive like civil war, coup or uprising. In the end, it just seems to go, aside from, him being stabbed to death, to go about relatively peacefully.
I just thought it could actually have been Tancred who knocked his
Yeah.
dad off. Get out of the way, old man.
That is actually the biggest case for kings to die, aside from like unpaid soldiers, is their sons getting impatient, feeling like it's their time now, old man. Get off the throne.
Maybe the grandson was playing the long game. You stole my fucking toy soldiers.
Like the only thing the assassins left behind by Estred's body was a little tin horse.
And I think that takes us back around. On that note, do you guys have any closing remarks at the end of Towers Follows Chapter 8?
I think maybe for like readers, definitely for this as a first time read, I would recommend them like, yeah, sure, this might have been a very different chapter, maybe a lot of information that seems for now superfluous, but when slowly later this book, well, the next book, going to be a lot of more, once again, political stuff happening, and then names are getting dropped or events are happening. Think back to this chapter, then suddenly those things don't come off nowhere, they make sense, and suddenly this chapter, you can see how much of a foundation it was, but it has very late and slow payoff, so keep that in mind.
I wonder what happened to Jediah Mekasa. Clang.
It is, I think, a bit odd, like bumping into this chapter. Do you feel like, oh, where's the momentum? Now we're talking about like exporting like precious metals. What just happened? And we're like sailing down a drizzly canal with a character that we love to hate. And it's like, what? But at the same time, like as you said, Daniel, I think that this, on like a reread especially, there's so much to enjoy about this chapter. There's a lot to kind of get lost in terms of the conspiring that's kind of happening between Esterad, Dijkstra, and even Zuleika, and then just the payoff toward the end of the series for this chapter is incredibly rewarding. Some of my like favorite moments from the subsequent book, Lady of the Lake, do find their hold in this chapter. Rereading it, I feel like, Leonardo DiCaprio pointing at the TV being like, ooh, I like that character. I can't wait to see them again. Lots to enjoy.
Yeah, but for example, then those Condocherries, Joe and Pretty Kitty get mentioned again, like, oh yes, I know them.
I love Pretty Kitty. Yeah. What about you, Softie? Any last words?
I'm just kind of in awe that we somehow, as two historians, managed to be all restrained about the taxation of building fronts and stuff that we just passed on, Didn't mention window taxes, hearth taxes, nothing like that. I think we've been really good.
I think it helps that we have already mentioned Amsterdam, where the houses are also quite thin and high. So it's like, yeah, we don't have to extra mention other ways it resembles it. But now that you've mentioned it...
Bonus content. Well, on that fun note, or to leave everything unsaid about the fronts in Amsterdam and their parallels in the Witcher saga, that is going to be it for our show today. Daniel, Softie, thank you both so much for joining us for this episode, and thank you to our Hansa for listening. So you can find both of today's guests, Daniel and Softie, in the Hansa Discord, and Softie on their regular book club discussions, hosted by himself and Kitty. And next episode, join us as we continue our discussion with Andrzej Sapkowski's Tower of Swallows, Chapter 9. Thanks for joining us at the Breakfast Table. For show notes, transcripts of each episode, and complete lists on our social platforms and listening services, head over to breakfastandboclair.com. Breakfast and Beauclair is created by Alyssa from Good Morning. It's hosted by Alyssa. The show is edited by Alyssa and Caleb Byes, with music by Alex Berner. Breakfast and Beauclair is produced by Alyssa in New York City, with Katie the Redhead of Toussaint, Jacob B., Charlotte from Bangor Glamour, the Original Roach, Libby, John and Briblia, Tom from Australia, Jill Kate the Tabby Witch, Ollie from Sweden, James Carson III, Miriam Tamaria, Softie, Lisa C., and Sidna. Special thanks to Daniel and Softie for joining us for this episode, and our International Hansa for their support.